Welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of the steering committee of the TESOL Reading and Vocabulary Intersection, I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to everybody. And we're really excited to host our first Reading and Vocabulary Intersection webinar today. We're really lucky to have Dr. Michelle Benegas, who is professor of TESOL at Hamline University. And she also leads a professional development initiative through the U.S. Department of Education. And she recently co-authored a book called Teacher Leadership for School-Wide English Learning. So thank you so much, Dr. Benegas, for being here today. And please join me in welcoming her today. If you can do an emoji reaction, since we can't clap. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. I'm so glad to be with you, and I appreciate the warm welcome. As Hedel shared, I am Michelle Benegas, and in addition to and the other roles that Hedel mentioned, I'm the chair of the Teacher Education Interest section of TESOL International this term. So I'm also hosting similar webinars, just like this one. So kudos to your interest section for digging in and hosting these events. So today I'm going to be presenting on morphemic awareness as an equity issue. And I'm going to start by telling a story about a student of mine who approached me, and he said, you know, I'm really invested in social justice and education, and I want to design a thesis, a master's thesis that is very social justice oriented. And I said, all right, what are you thinking about? And he said, I'm thinking about morphology. And my face kind of fell. And I thought, what does morphology have to do with social justice? I don't know if I was that blunt when I talked with him, but I didn't see the connection. And John went on to explain to me and present his idea for a study that absolutely illustrated the connections between morphemic awareness and social justice. And we'll dig into that in my presentation today, and I'll share some of John's words at the end of our presentation. So our agenda for today is organized in 3 ways. All of the work that I do is organized in these 3 ways. In teacher education, we want to be attending to teacher dispositions, teacher knowledge, and teacher skills. So we'll look at those 3 areas when we're talking about morphemic awareness. The disposition here being that teaching word parts is everybody's job. We should all be doing this. And by we, I mean English educators as well as general education educators. For knowledge, why is it important to teach morphemes? So we'll get into the why. And then for skills, I'm going to highlight 5 ways that you can teach morphemes in any classroom. And I do want to highlight that this approach is it is usable. It is worth applying in any context, whether you are in a K-12 context, whether you are teaching adults. And you know, on that note, I want to know who's in the room. Could you throw in the chat where you're geographically, where you're joining us from, and what sort of a context you work in? If you are in, you know, elementary or secondary or college or adult, and what part of the world you're joining us from. And as people are putting that into the chat box, I'll also share that we're going to do a few breakouts. So be prepared for that, that you'll be in small groups, and I'll be sharing some links. I'm trying to make today's session as interactive as possible. Hello, Samira from Iran. Ecuador, Beijing. Hello, Bintang. Linguistics. We have a wonderful spread in this room. I think that there is a misconception that morphology or looking at morphemes is just something for young children. And so today I am going to provide a rebuttal for that, for why that isn't just important for kids. Great, we have a wonderful spread here in this room. I think that your breakout conversations are going to be really rich. All right, so let's start with dispositions. So dispositions, again, are your frame of mind, your mindset around doing something. So what is a teacher disposition towards teaching morphology? Maybe their disposition is that this isn't my job, this isn't what I do, but we want to work to reframe that. So let's talk about why English is so hard, first of all. One of the reasons that students have had difficulty with academic vocabulary is that the English language itself is really complex. And that's not news to any of you in this room, but it can be for our students. Ebers and Denton have called English a mongrel mix of Latin, Greek, and German. And when I have taught the history of English, I have long called English the language with very unhappily married parents. We have German, right, who provides us with a lot of kind of strong monosyllabic words like smart. And we have the mother of Latin who provides us with these long, elegant words like intelligent. And our spelling system is a mess as a result of these two kind of competing languages coming together. In fact, I've heard it said that our spelling system is about 500 years behind our spoken language. We're just not catching up fast enough. So we know that English is hard. The socio-political history of English has resulted in a modern day language with significant irregularity, both morphologically and phonetically. So when we're teaching rules and then we're telling them when they break the rule, that is something that isn't unique to English, but English really has a lot of that. All right, so let's look at morphological analysis as a roadmap. Maine says that when students believe that success is a possibility and play an active role in defining what it means to be successful, their engagement increases exponentially. So I want to just challenge you to think of a time that you have used your own morphological awareness, that you have looked at a word that you didn't know, or considered the parts of a word that you didn't know and tried to make sense of it in that space. I think we've all done that, but it's important that we explicitly teach our students how to do that. So we know that morphemes are word parts, and I'm going to be really intentional here to not talk a lot about what morphemes are, but more about why it's important to teach them and how to teach them. But in its most basic sense, we can say that there are three, not four, types of morphemes. First, the root, that's in the middle, it gives the word its principal meaning. Then the prefix attaches to the front and the suffix attaches to the end. And each morpheme provides more meaning to the word. So we're going to be doing an activity here in just a minute. And this is an activity I do with teachers to drive home how morphological awareness is taught at all levels. And in my state in the United States, in the state of Minnesota, our local university has a course on medical terminology in which they teach their medical students morphemes so that they can better understand medical terms. So an example of a word with three parts, the parts that I just presented, is pericarditis. I didn't know what this word was upon looking at it, but I could use my skills to figure it out. It means inflammation of the outer layer of the heart. So pericarditis can be divided into three parts: peri and card and itis. We know that peri means surrounding or around something. The root card means heart, and the suffix itis means inflammation. So we can put those pieces together to understand what this word means. I'm going to have you do an activity just right now in small groups where you're going to be using the University of Minnesota's website. Let me show you how they have it organized. And I'll be putting these links in the chat box here. All right, so they present to you some commonly used prefixes, and I'd like for you to click on that, and you'll be using this as a bank. They also give you some commonly used, oh shoot, I can't see them. Commonly used roots and commonly used suffixes. So you'll be using that to guide your discussion. And you're going to be taking a quiz, pop quiz, low stakes though. And so this quiz, let me put the quiz, I'm going to put everything in the chat box right now so that you can see these things. All right, so here is the site that I'm going to have you use to support you in doing this activity. And let me stop sharing my screen for just a minute here. And I'm going to share the quiz with you as well. You're going to do this quiz in small groups. And I'm going to share the answer key as well, but I want to challenge you not to look at the answer key until you've really given it a good shot, okay? And it's a short quiz. Answer key. All right, there you go. Okay, so heading back to my slides. In your small groups, I'm going to have you review these commonly used prefixes and suffixes and roots. I'm going to have you take the quiz. That was the first, the first Google link that I put in the chat box. And then I'm going to have you finally use that link to see if you were correct. I do have some discussion questions as well. And the discussion question is, I'll make sure that this goes in the chat as well. How did this experience influence your thinking about teaching morphemes in your context? So you'll be doing both of those things. You'll be taking the quiz together and you'll be having a discussion about how it influenced your thinking about teaching morphemes in your context. The best part of coming back from breakout rooms is you get to see everyone's faces. Hey, Patsy. Great to see you. All right, I think we've got everybody back. I'd love to hear how this experience influenced your thinking about teaching morphemes. Now, I know that we are the choir, right? When we talk about like preaching to the choir, you attended this because you already thought it was a good idea. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this experience and teaching morphemes. Either, I think we've got a small enough group, so it could either be in the chat box, or if somebody wants to raise their cartoon hand, you can share that way as well. All right, Nikki.
Hello. Yeah, we did refer to the list of morphemes, but we did draw a lot on other words that we knew. So we tried to, we really made a lot of connections like, well, I've seen this word part in this other word that I know that means this thing. So we did, so I think it could be really important then to do that with our students as well, to elicit other words that they know that have that same part so they can make connections to their prior knowledge and experience.
Absolutely. And you had that skill set. You developed that skill set of recognizing word parts. Thanks, Nikki. Kristen, how about you? Kristen Summers.
Sorry, similar to what Nikki said, that we really didn't refer to the list. We were just using what we already knew about words to, but part of it was eliminating other choices. I'm not sure I could have just come up with the correct answer without maybe going further to consult the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. I see people in the chat box saying it's hard. It's really hard. Here we are as some well-decorated professionals in the field, and we struggle. We really struggle. And Christine Kelly mentions that it's a good reminder that if there's no context for students, knowing morphemes just gives them one more way to figure out what words mean. So it's not just look at the context around it, it's also look into the word to find the parts that you recognize. Thanks for doing that with me, everybody. And just a side note, this is a great activity to show your colleagues, if you work with others, why teaching morphemes is important, because they'll often say, well, the ESL teacher down the hall will do that. Well, you need to do that too. All right, so we're going to move into knowledge. My chair, actually, I'll share with you, during the pandemic, took up the habit of showing us animals, and it just kind of soothed all of us when we were stressed out. So I'm copying him and trying to find cute animals to show you in the midst of our conversation about morphology. So I want you to put in the chat box, how did you learn about word beginnings, endings, and their meanings in your first language? Someone, I think it was Nikki, said, well, I already knew what some of these word parts were. If you could share any experience with learning about word parts in your first language in the chat box. So Nikki says looking in a dictionary. So maybe a self-guided trip through the dictionary where you're looking at word parts. Stephen got explicit instruction in school. That's fantastic, Stephen. I can't say the same for myself. Studied Latin. Many people notice word parts for the first time in a world language class. Okay, elementary school, science class. I'm sure much of the learning was implicit through reading. I think that, and I believe your name's Doreen, makes a really important part that many of us do not receive explicit instruction like Stephen did. All right, great. Thanks everybody for sharing that. All right, so why read more isn't always the answer. I'm sure many of you have heard that, well, you just need to read more, or just tell your students that they need to read more, and then they'll get it, it'll click. And we know that that is not true for everyone. So Edmonds et al. Says that while wide reading is proven to increase vocabulary and comprehension, it has not always been effective with multi-morphemic words. This is where struggling secondary learners need the most support. And this is when they point out secondary, the words start to becoming more complex at the secondary level, moving into college and adult levels. Mountain also points out, and this may or may not be relevant in your context, that if you happen to have students that share a parent language, like Spanish does, we share Latin as a parent language, they may benefit greatly from morphemic analysis, given that they have shared affixes between English and Spanish, or English and Romanian, or whatever language that might be. So the answer is not read more. For those of you who are in K-12, I also think that the read more, that message is relayed to parents frequently, and then parents start to wonder, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong, and that can be hard. So how can morphemic analysis help? Nagy and Anderson found that 60% of word meanings in school text in grades 3 through 9 can be predicted through their morphemes. That's huge. So if you have access to these word pieces, you can make sense of so many more words. So it really is, it's an improvement from just studying vocabulary words and learning words as isolated entities. Understanding of the building blocks of language can significantly impact a student's ability to determine the meaning of unknown words. And we know we're not going to know all of the words that we stumble across, so we need to develop these skills. And lastly, research shows that morphemic analysis improves students' perception of their ability to understand unknown academic vocabulary and complex texts. For me, this one is the most impactful, and this one has the most, it relates to social justice in that it builds students up to believe that they have the capacity. So they approach a text or they approach a class believing that they can make sense of it rather than believing that they can't. All right, so moving on to skills. The skills is the how-to. So if I'm on board and I think that this is a good idea, but I don't know how to do it, how might I get started? And of course, we're looking specifically at English here, right? I know that morphemes can look really different from one language to the next. So we're specifically looking at English. So the first strategy that I'm going to give actually sounds like a comment that was made in this group. It's called the outside in strategy. It says 2 word solving strategies, contextual and morphological analysis, should be taught in conjunction for the greatest positive outcome. So clue number 1 here we see all of the time in reading instruction. Look outside of the word for context clues. And that's a really good one, but as one of our colleagues shared, we can't always find context in order to make sense. So we want to train our students to also look inside of the word for morphemic clues, parts of words that they recognize, and then have them reread the section. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is word dissection. And one of the reasons I wanted to share my slides with you is I want you to have access to these different tools. And if one of you, Hedel or Nancy, could make sure that that's in the chat box so they can access it, that would be great. So this is a graphic that you can use with students. If you put a word with multiple morphemes in the middle, then they can work to break those morphemes apart. Always starting with the root. What does that root mean? And then what are some other words that share that root? So I heard earlier today, one of our colleagues said, I thought of other words that shared that morpheme, and that's really helpful here. We can do that as well with the prefix again, and here are some other words that use re. We can do that with the suffix. What is able? It's the power to do something. And oh, excuse me, I lost those. And those are some other words that share that suffix. So this is one way that students can break apart words and learn a variety of morphemes. And this is a great one to use in classes that have really big words that students need to be breaking down and making sense of. Activity 3 is word part cards. So for this activity, you would choose a root word and then possible prefixes and possible suffixes for the end, and talk through what those new words might mean. So confronted, right? Or beachfront, etc. Affronted. There's another example of what that might look like. Activity 4 is a root word tree. So you give them an actual tree and you show them if the root is the word part, what are different words that share that root? Partisan, apartment, apartheid, depart, compartment. I would share with many of you that said that you first started to think about morphemes in a world language class. That was true for me as well. And I remember thinking about English, and particularly the prefix community, communism, compartmentalize, commune, and realizing that that word meant with, and not having noticed that previously. So this can be a huge eye-opener for our students. I'm going to show you a sample. This is strategy number 5, and it's called structured word inquiry. And we're going to watch a teacher. He is guiding young students through an SWI lesson, but I think this could be done with any age group of students. So we're going to watch him for a few minutes to see how he teaches morphemes in his class. Hopefully sound is working. I would love it if somebody could put in the chat box, yes, if you can hear the sound.
From the central idea, we got provoke and inform. I'm just going to start with provoke. What can I think of without consulting any resources yet? I'm just thinking of provoke. What are some words that might come up? Evoke. Okay, you've heard of evoke before. So right away, that makes me think, maybe PRO plus VOKE. So let me see. PRO plus VOKE. Might that be the word sum? Might that be the proper analysis? Well, Yule made me think that could work. I've heard of evoke before, to evoke emotion from another person. What else? Anything else that you've heard of with that? Basically, what he's saying is maybe the base word is VOKE. Brian?
I just have a question. Is provoke and evoke the same thing, since it means like bring to you, sort of?
Very cool. Like bring to, so provoke. Have you ever had siblings provoke you into an argument? Kind of bring you into an argument? And evoke, when I think of evoke, I think of that poem or that movie evoked this sadness in me. So it kind of brought out this feeling. So is it similar? Does it have the same kind of sense? Good. Anybody heard of invoke? And at this point, I'm kind of stuck. Except for PRO, that prefix, can I think of other words that PRO is a prefix, Harry?
Protect.
That's an interesting one. Protect. I wonder if PRO is the prefix in that. TECT. Can I think of other words where TECT might be the base? You.
Detect.
Detect. Ooh, maybe. Detect. Detect, protect. Yeah? That TECT, I wasn't really sure about that one. When Harry said that, ooh, I hadn't thought of that one. Give me some other PRO. Let's come back to detect and protect. Some other PRO. Yeah, Carmen? Professional. A lot of people were doing that one. So let me think. PRO. FESS. What suffix am I going to put next? Anybody say it? ION. AL. Okay.
All right, we're going to stop there. He's so fun to watch, though. I could show him all morning. He does an amazing job of getting these kids to take up really sophisticated language and break it down and make sense of it, and think about language as a family and how these different words come from different places and they're used in different ways. So I won't go too deep into SWI, but that is one way of teaching morphemes as well.
We got provoke.
So I'm going to put you into small groups again, those same small groups, and I want you to discuss these activities. I've already seen some fun discussion in the chat box around these activities. For example, someone commented on how, could we cut up these cards? Is that how it would be used? I think there is not one right way to do this. And so I would like for you right now in your groups to be thinking about activities like these or how you might modify them to make them make sense in the classes that you teach. But then also think about any additional resources that you need to be able to fold activities like these into your instruction. Hey, everybody. All right, so I'm going to bring you back to my student, John Avery's research. And the title of his thesis was The Effects of Using Morphemic Analysis on Comprehension of Unknown Academic Vocabulary. And this was in an urban public school where he felt that his students were struggling both with confidence as well as with their ability to carry out tasks in the classroom because of their lack of understanding of word parts. So the big findings from his study were that morphemic analysis affected students' ability to comprehend unknown vocabulary in two significant ways. The first one, that it increased participants' comprehension of unknown vocabulary. So we know that one. If you know word parts, you can understand more words, right? That's pretty obvious. But the big aha is that it improved perceptions of their ability to understand unknown academic vocabulary and complex texts. So they feel that they have a tool belt filled with tools, and they may or may not be able to solve the problem, but at least they have the tools. So there was a good question in the chat box, and it was, but sometimes it looks like a prefix and you think it means something, but it doesn't necessarily, right? And we know that English is full of problems like that due to the unhappy marriage. So we know that that sort of thing is going to come up, and we can attend to those as, you know, irregularities. But it is so important for students to feel, and for all of us to feel, that we have tools. So when I encounter that quiz, that medical terminology quiz, I don't just look the other way. I say, wait a second, I recognize some parts of these words and I can make sense of them. And that builds up my sense of self and my sense of intelligence and how I am able to solve problems. So let's share a quote from John. This is from 2017, but it rings so true right now. He says, "Personally, I have run out of patience with social justice discourse that discusses the opportunity gap within education, yet fails to offer meaningful research-based strategies that can actually address the gap within my field of education. Morphemic analysis is more than an academic exercise for me. It is a way to act justly and lead by example. It is a chance for me to stop talking about the problem and start being a part of the solution. Many 21st century educators, such as myself, find ourselves in a losing battle in which we are expected to solve the many problems that plague our society, such as poverty, racism, and xenophobia, yet have so little control over the root causes of those aforementioned problems. At the same time, a dose of radical self-reflection is also required, in that there are actions we as educators can take that are within the locus of our control. There are practices that can have a real impact on the lives of the students we teach and on the culture in which we live. I believe there are glimmers of hope in sometimes mundane topics such as morphemic analysis." So I want to share a few tools to put in your tool belt as far as, you know, if you want to dig into this sort of work with your colleagues, you can certainly use these resources, these websites. I want to thank you for spending this time with me and open up space for Q&A. I think that there might have been, let's see, some comments in the chat box. I also want to attend to Anne. First of all, thank you for catching that beach is not a prefix. That is absolutely true. But I also want to say that in the context where I teach in the United States, there is a lot of phobia around grammar and around language in general. And so teachers, non-language teachers, tend to steer clear of all topics language because they say, well, I don't understand that stuff. I can't remember the parts of speech. So I think if we keep our language simple and we say that we're talking about word parts, what's the first part? What's the second part? What's the third part? Then we know that our colleagues in other areas will be able to take this up. So while it's important that we all know the difference between compound words and prefixes and roots and et cetera, it's maybe not for our colleagues, that they just need to be able to identify parts of words. All right, so let's do the cartoon hand approach again. So if anybody has a question that they want to ask to the group, or if you want to throw something in the chat box, please feel free to do so. Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, so in this presentation, you primarily talked about the derivational morphemes. And I also teach a kind of introduction to linguistics course for pre-service and in-service teachers. And we have a discussion in that class about, well, when would you begin to teach your learners who are ESL and EFL students, when, you know, what grade, what age, what proficiency level would you start to teach them about morphemes? And my students who are graduate students, they kind of break into two camps. So some of them say, oh, well, you know, this is more advanced, this is more complex. I wouldn't introduce this until the students are older, until middle school or high school. And then I have another camp that says, well, wait a minute, you know, we teach are kindergartners, that S is plural, and ing means we're doing something. So we begin teaching inflectional morphemes very early to beginners and to children of young ages. So I think maybe that can be kind of a segue, if we work with teachers about teaching the inflectional morphemes, then they'll feel more comfortable also teaching the derivational morphemes.
That is so interesting, Nikki. And I do wonder, is that an American problem? There is an American fear around talking about language in the classroom. They're not ready for that. They're not old enough for that yet. I think it's really strange, but you make a good point that we're doing it. We're already doing it. So why not do so explicitly and even the playing field for everybody? That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. Jelena, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, says, do you think morphemic awareness is as important in the English L1 context as in the EFL context? Also, when would it be appropriate to introduce morphological analysis in the EFL classroom? I mean, I think the first question there is a matter of, well, belief, right? And I think about English as a tool for social mobility, whether you are living in an English dominant country or not. And so, providing more tools, providing people with the access to make sense independently on their own, I think is always a good thing. So I think it would be very helpful in an EFL context. And your second question there gets at Nikki's question, which is, when would it be appropriate? When I teach teachers, I encourage them to be teaching language, ESL teachers, at the word and the sentence and the discourse level. I think some teachers can get really stuck in what I call the vocabulary trap, where they just talk about what words mean over and over and over again, or they just get stuck in the grammar trap, where they're conjugating verbs over and over again. So I think it's really important for us to be always thinking about those three areas. The word level, which is morphology, parts of words, phonology, how words sound, and semantics, what words mean, the sentence level being syntax, and the discourse level being like genre or text type. All right, let's see. There's so much good stuff here. Julie says, in my small group, I was talking about how I learned prefixes in preschool. That's fantastic. And your kids are, so Montessori is onto something there. It sounds like Montessori is thinking about that. I want to pick up, Kelly says, I also teach intro to linguistics and we touch on infixes. Yes, a whole nother has always been like nails on the chalkboard for me. It drives me crazy and I say it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an infix. That's so interesting that you pointed that one out. Doreen, what's on your mind?
I was going to respond to what Yelena had said about working with domestic or L1 students. I'm doing a study of vocabulary breadth right now at a university, and looking at our international students, but also all levels of our domestic students, many of whom are multilingual. And then I have some monolinguals in there as well. And the disparity in breadth between all varieties of learners who have some other language in their repertoire and the monolinguals is gross. I mean, it's big and it's bothersome. And to me, that is a social justice issue, because they're being hampered in their writing simply by a much smaller repertoire of English vocabulary, even though they're completely fluent, in using the language grammatically in every other way. So it seems as though if we took that seriously, that at that level, exactly when students have to deal with texts that are often pushing them at their comprehension level, and then the expectations are high, I think it would actually be a great intervention to work with multilingual students at the university level to raise awareness about morphemes and how to parse words.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Doreen. And I'm really intentional about forcing everyone to go to the University of Minnesota's medical school website to debunk the idea that this is only for a certain stage of education, you know, that this is only for people who are learning English and it's only for young people, or it's not, it's for everybody. It's for me. We all need to understand morphemes in order to make sense of language. All right, we've got just a couple of minutes. I could probably take one more question or comment, or we can close up. All right, I think we'll close up there then. This has been such a fun discussion. Thank you for welcoming me over to your side. I do have to say that, and I'm sure you all can relate to this, that, you know, you feel a little bit of imposter syndrome when you go into a different area. And I am so teacher education minded that I thought when I came over here, maybe you guys were gonna blow me away with your knowledge, and I wasn't gonna connect, but I felt like we made some really good connections here, and it was great to get to know all of you, and I wish you well.
Thank you so much.